My name is Miles Carver, and for 15 years I played the part, husband, provider, father. I paid bills on time, kept the fridge full, kissed scraped knees, and listened to Leona rehearse half-hearted ambitions over dinner. I kept our home standing, even as the foundation began to shift beneath us. But nothing prepared me for the way it all came undone that Tuesday afternoon. I wasn't at home. I wasn't in a courtroom. I wasn't even in some fancy mediation center with tissues on the table and neutral tones painted on the walls to make betrayal feel civil. I was in my office, chair tilted slightly back, eyes scanning a revised security clause on a contract for Hollow Ridge Risk Solutions, where I'd worked my way from analyst to partner over 13 determined years. I had just flagged an error in the indemnity clause when my door creaked open. Not knocked, creaked. That alone told me the visitor didn't respect boundaries. Then she stepped in. Mara Ellison. Designer heels. Folder in hand. And that face, plastic perfect in the way only high-stakes attorneys and news anchors pull off. The kind of woman who smelled like old money and cold strategy. I'd seen her once before on a billboard off Interstate 74. Divorce with dignity. Funny slogan for someone holding the sharp end of a guillotine. Mr. Carver, she said without pause. Not, hello. Not sorry to interrupt, just a name stated like a verdict. I stood, closed the contract I was reviewing, and motioned to the guest chair. She didn't sit. That should have been the next warning. She wasn't here for discussion. She was here for delivery. Mrs. Carver, she began, as if I needed the reminder, will retain full custodial rights to your children, retain the primary residence and vacation property, as well as the bank accounts under both your names. She delivered the information like she was reading off the weather. Calm, robotic. No breath between daggers. There will be no alimony sought. Your visitation will be supervised until otherwise reviewed by court-appointed evaluation. And she gave the smallest smile, a cut disguised as courtesy. Both children have expressed intent to legally remove your surname. My fingers didn't twitch. My shoulders didn't stiffen. I had rehearsed this moment in my head too many times for it to rattle me now. I nodded slowly, watching her, not blinking, not giving her the decency of a reaction. Your wife has already filed in family court. A temporary order is being reviewed as we speak. Any attempt to contest will likely result in a deeper inquiry into your work-related travel and prolonged absences. She was playing her part well. Cold professionalism dressed as compassion. I wondered how many men she'd reduced to dust in this exact room before. Probably dozens. I smiled. A calm, deliberate gesture, then reached into the drawer on my left. I pulled out a sealed white envelope. No name, no label, no dramatics. Just a tight, clean fold and a weight it didn't show. I handed it to her over the desk. Deliver this to your client, I said, still smiling. She raised an eyebrow, probably assuming it was some emotional plea, a last-minute note begging for grace. She took it between two fingers like it might stain her. I didn't speak again. There was nothing else to say. As she turned and clicked her way out of my office, her heels echoing too sharply against the hardwood floor, I let the moment settle in. My phone buzzed on the desk, and I glanced at it. A reminder about a staff meeting at 3:30. It could wait. Because what she didn't know, what Leona didn't know, what none of them realized, was that war wasn't declared when papers were filed. It was declared when assumptions were made. When they looked at me and saw compliance. When they thought silence meant weakness, when they assumed that building a family made me incapable of burning down a legacy. They were wrong. 15 years of partnership, of sacrifice, of being the man who always showed up, didn't vanish in an instant because of an affair or a well-dressed lawyer. It fractured because they stopped seeing me as a man and started treating me like furniture. Stable, expected, unremarkable. The envelope I handed Mara wasn't dramatic. No photos, no confession. It was documentation. Legal, clean, verified. A simple beginning. Inside was a notarized statement outlining an initial transfer of funds, ones Leona had quietly funneled into a shared account with her business partner, Grant Mercer, an account created without full disclosure, funded with my earnings. Technically, it was fraud, but it was just a taste. Enough to make her second-guess her position. Enough to rattle her timing. Enough to let her know. I knew. They underestimated me. All of them. I had spent the last 6 months peeling back layers, tracking irregular account activity, hiring a private investigator, speaking with auditors, even digging into the licensing contracts for Leona's firm. Not out of pettiness, out of precision. She thought she was playing chess with a man still learning the rules. But I was already 10 moves in, and I hadn't even touched the board yet. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence of my office wrap around me like armor. The office door remained slightly ajar from Mara's exit, and I could hear the muffled sounds of keyboards clacking in the hallway, the hum of midweek routine. No one out there knew the shift that had just occurred. To them, I was still Miles Carver, respectable, predictable, the guy with the neat desk and quick smile. Let them think it. That mask served me better now than it ever had before. I turned back to my laptop, finished the clause revision, saved the document, then closed it. The war had begun, and I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw a fit or send a single threatening message. I simply opened the drawer beneath my desk, one line with neatly organized files, hard drives, and a duplicate key to a safe deposit box. I'd spent too long protecting a house that was already on fire. Now, I would protect what mattered. My children, my legacy, and the truth. They wanted me quiet. They got quiet. But they forgot one thing. Still waters don't mean still minds. They just mean the storm hasn't surfaced yet. Leona used to have this way of answering the phone, soft, distracted, like whatever she was hearing was more important than where she was. I noticed it a year ago, maybe more. She'd tilt her head, curl her fingers around the receiver like a secret she was protecting, and whisper, "Hey." Not hello. Not yes. Just that lazy, familiar, "hey," that you don't give to a stranger or a coworker. That, "hey," was the first crack. It was always followed by silence when I walked in. She'd smile too brightly, ask me what I wanted for dinner, pretend she hadn't just been speaking in code. But I didn't confront her. I didn't ask questions she was prepared to lie in response to. I didn't rage or snoop through her phone like some jealous caricature of a husband losing his grip. I waited. I watched. I let her think I was busy, too busy with meetings, projects, clients, mergers. Let her believe I didn't notice that her lipstick was fresh at 9 p.m. when she claimed she was too tired to finish a single conversation with me by dinner. She thought I was dull, predictable, easy to lie to. That was her mistake. I started with the car. Leona always kept it clean, like she was afraid mess might stick to her reputation. But there it was, one parking receipt from the Langley Hotel. Tucked into the side compartment. Dated on a weekend, she said she was visiting her mother. Room 804. That told me more than any lipstick stain or perfume trail ever could. Grant Mercer, her business partner. I had never liked him. Too polished, too complimentary, always finding a reason to shake my hand twice and call me champ. The kind of man who measured women with his eyes and hid behind buzzwords in board meetings. Leona swore he was just a visionary. I guess she was right. He saw her. I saw them both. So I built my case. Quietly, patiently. 6 months of surveillance. Not just the photos, though I had plenty. Hotel meetups, late office sessions that turned into overnight stays. Even a weekend conference in Seattle where only one room was booked under both their names. I didn't leak them. Not yet. I filed them. Studied patterns. I built timelines, matched their lies to digital footprints. I hired a forensic accountant to review their boutique firm spending. The numbers told their own story. Thousands skimmed from a shared operations fund, one that Leona had begged me to help launch. I had cut the check myself. The irony didn't even burn anymore. It just made me sharper. They thought I was asleep, that I was numb from years of routine. But I was wide awake, and every second of their deception was being cataloged, tagged, dated. Not for revenge, for leverage, for accuracy. You don't strike until the structure is ready to fall. Otherwise, all you do is dent the surface and waste the moment. I learned more than I wanted to. Not just about her infidelity. About her priorities. Her values. Leona had been siphoning emotion out of our marriage like it was too expensive to maintain. She stopped kissing me goodbye. Stopped laughing at my dry humor. Her hands didn't linger anymore. Our texts went from full sentences to short replies. K became her favorite word. The kind of cold you can't measure with a thermostat. Just the absence of warmth. I started keeping a journal. Not the confessional kind. Just notes. Patterns. Dates. A catalog of silence. Each night she came home later, I logged it. Each time the kids said she missed dinner, or forgot a recital, or promised something and flaked. Another entry. Leona was unraveling long before Mara Ellison showed up in my office. And the truth is, I think she wanted to be caught. Or maybe she didn't care if she was. She underestimated me. Not because I was weak, but because I let her forget that I was strategic, that my mind was a vault that never lost receipts. They thought I was the kind of man who would get emotional, make a scene, maybe even beg. That's what their circle was used to petty chaos. But I built my entire life on structure, on preparation, on endurance. I wasn't going to start reacting just because the betrayal was personal now. I kept our family routine normal, even as the undercurrent of everything shifted. I cooked dinner when she was late. I helped Avery with her science projects, taught Jonas how to change a flat tire. I showed up, not for Leona, for them. Because I knew when the curtain finally dropped, they'd need to remember who stayed grounded when everything else turned to smoke. They'd need to know who was steady while their mother chased a fantasy behind hotel doors. One night, after she came home with mascara smudged beneath her eyes and the scent of someone else's cologne barely masked by a mini spray, I sat at the edge of our bed and asked her a single question. "Are you happy?" Her mouth twitched. "I'm tired," she said. That wasn't an answer, and we both knew it. I said nothing more. Because silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's a weapon sharper than any accusation. My silence told her I didn't believe her, that I wasn't clinging anymore, that I knew. When she began seeing Mara, she must have thought she was taking the first step, that she'd control the pace of this unraveling. But what she didn't understand, what Grant didn't understand, was that by the time they came for me, I had already built the fire exits, tested the alarms, and called the demolition crew. Their betrayal wasn't a surprise. It was a variable in an equation I'd already solved. Let them think I was the blind husband, too busy closing contracts to notice the foundation rotting. Let them sleep in borrowed beds thinking they were ahead of me. What I had was time. And time reveals all things, especially when you watch, not weep. When you plan, not plead. So I smiled at Mara when she delivered her blow. I didn't flinch because there was nothing left to break. I'd already accepted the loss. Now I was reclaiming the narrative. And no one saw it coming. It started with a photo I wasn't supposed to find. A gala fundraiser flyer tucked into an old project folder I pulled from the garage, looking for something unrelated. It was dated 2007, Hollow Ridge's early years, back when I was still climbing the ladder, still hungry, still unaware that the people I'd one day marry into had skeletons not just in closets, but sealed behind courtroom doors. The flyer had Genevieve Alden's signature grin printed front and center. Chin high, eyes proud, the classic Alden posture of a woman who'd never been told no. But the man beside her caught my eye, not because of who he was, but because I remembered a story. A whisper from years ago. Something in the news that disappeared as quickly as it appeared. I set the folder down and started digging. There's something about scandals from the pre-social media era. They don't go viral. They get buried. Strategically. Efficiently. I had to start with archived newspapers, public records, donations lists. I found a mention of a lawsuit. Dismissed. Then a judge's name. A settlement. Sealed records. The deeper I went, the more tangled it got. A boating accident. A 17-year-old girl. The niece of a housekeeper. The whispers were there if you knew what to listen for. The girl had accused Genevieve's husband, Charles Alden, then a city commissioner, of coercion and concealment after her sister died during a summer weekend at the Alden's lakeside property. At the time, the official statement claimed it was a tragic accident. No wrongdoing. No foul play. Just a young girl lost too soon. But the housekeeper's niece told a different story. That her sister was seen crying hours before. That Charles Alden had taken her on the boat privately. That Genevieve had told the housekeeper to keep her family quiet or lose the job. It wasn't just the death that shook me. It was the coordination after. The way lawyers moved. The judge who sealed the record, someone the Aldens had hosted for dinner countless times. That judge had retired quietly in 2011. Died last year. The obituary called him a friend to the community. Funny how that community always protected its own. I hired a contact of mine, a former federal investigator who owed me a favor. Within a week, he got me access to copies of documents I wasn't supposed to have. Initial testimonies, motion requests, payout schedules. Everything about the case screamed hush money. The girl's family received a grief relief settlement in exchange for silence and relocation. But the niece, the one who tried to fight it, never recanted. She was simply drowned out. Her name was Vanessa Cole. At the time, She was 17, brave enough to step forward, young enough to be erased. The case never made it past discovery, and in the years since, the Aldens rebuilt, rebranded. Genevieve launched charities for women's empowerment, chaired scholarship foundations, hosted fundraisers in the same rooms where silence was once bought and paid for. I stared at the papers long and hard. There were notes in the margins. Handwriting I recognized. Genevieve's. Instructions. Edits. Phrases like unreliable narrator and emotional instability. They dismantled a teenager to protect their family name. I felt sick. This wasn't petty. This wasn't leverage to use in a divorce or a jab at Leona for her betrayal. This was a legacy built on rot. And my children carried that name. That blood. Avery. Jonas. They deserved to know the truth, not just about their mother, but about the family that propped her up, made her believe she was untouchable. But I couldn't move recklessly. I had to be surgical. If I exposed the files too early, it could be spun, buried again, or tied up in procedural mud. I needed to put it in the hands of people who wouldn't flinch. So I made copies, digital and print. I filed them in 4 different places. One in my office safe. One mailed to my cousin in Arizona with instructions to open if anything happened to me. One sent to a federal ethics committee contact I had worked with during a contract fraud audit in 2019. And one I sent to Vanessa Cole. Finding her took effort. She'd changed her last name, moved across the country, worked as a trauma counselor now. I didn't reach out directly. I didn't need to. I just enclosed the documents with a note. I believe you. And I think others will, too. There was a time when I believed keeping your hands clean meant staying out of the mud. But you can't uproot a rotting tree without getting dirty. And this was a forest of lies. I kept my own silence for long enough. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed to know the full depth of what I was up against. That night, I sat in the dark of my living room, the envelope spread across the coffee table, documents illuminated only by the glow of a single floor lamp. I thought about how easily Leona had weaponized my routine, how the Aldens used charm and money as shields, how many people had paid the price for their secrets. And I thought about my kids. About Avery's last birthday, when Genevieve gave her a designer necklace and whispered in her ear like she was passing on wisdom. About Jonas beaming when Charles clapped him on the back after a football game. They had no idea who they were idolizing. No clue what that family stood on. And they wouldn't, unless someone pulled back the curtain. So I prepared the final envelope. The one for Leona. It didn't contain everything. Just enough. A glimpse of the fire behind the door. It was meant to shake her. To let her know this wasn't just a custody battle or a divorce. This was a reckoning. I left it in the hands of someone I trusted. A quiet courier. Delivered to her design, firm mid-morning. Hand to hand. No signature required. By the time she opened it, I was already at work, sipping black coffee, reviewing a new proposal like it was any other Tuesday. But it wasn't. This was the day the past stopped being buried. This was the day the real war began. The invitation came in the form of a text, a digital olive branch wrapped in faux civility. Family dinner. 7 p.m. Casual. That was it. No name, no tone, no emotion, just a command dressed up like an offer. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, not because I was undecided, but because I knew what it meant. This wasn't dinner. This was theater. And I was expected to sit quietly through a performance I had already outwritten. I arrived 5 minutes early. On purpose. Let them feel me in the room before they had time to adjust their masks. Leona's parents' house was just as I remembered, lavish, meticulous, cold. It smelled like eucalyptus and calculation. The marble floors gleamed, and a staff of 2 flitted silently through the entryway like shadows trained not to speak. Genevieve greeted me first, lips tight, eyes sharper than usual. She kissed the air beside my cheek like we hadn't just stepped into open war. "So good to see you, Miles," she said. "I'm sure it is," I replied and smiled. She blinked, caught the undertone, but didn't engage. Charles followed her, hand extended like we were old friends at a fundraiser. I shook it. Firm grip. Empty gesture. We moved into the dining room, where everything had been arranged to the letter. Silver chargers, candlelight, crystal glasses set with an obsessive symmetry. Even the napkin rings looked overproduced. This was the Aldens at their best. Choreographed elegance to hide the cracks beneath the gold leaf. Leona was already seated, sipping white wine, legs crossed like she was hosting. A reunion and not sitting across from the man whose world she tried to set on fire. She wore soft mauve, the kind of dress that invited calm. Her smile was practiced. It didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks for coming," she said like it hadn't been her lawyer who barged into my office with divorce orders and an ultimatum. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, sliding into my seat. Avery sat to her right, fork already twirling through the Caesar salad. She glanced at me, gave a faint smile, then looked back at her plate. Jonas was more animated, talking about his school project, a video game design he was building from scratch. His enthusiasm bubbled in the space between us like nothing had changed. He didn't know. Not yet. And that was what made this entire charade burn even colder. The kids had no idea their mother had moved court to strip me of rights. They had no clue about the sealed documents or the storm that was about to crash through the front doors of their legacy. They were just trying to enjoy dinner. So I let them. I laughed when Jonas cracked a joke about his coding bugs. I complimented Avery's nail polish. I asked Charles about his recent golf injury, which he explained in such rich detail I nearly applauded. I played the part because sometimes you have to lull the enemy into thinking their performance is still effective. And Leona? She leaned into it. At one point, she reached over and touched my wrist lightly. "Really, Miles," she said in a voice barely above a murmur, "it doesn't have to be ugly. We can do this like adults. Clean. Quiet." I looked at her, not harshly, almost sympathetically. "You're right," I said. "But what if I already decided to do it like a Carver?" Her eyes narrowed. That smile faltered just slightly, just enough for me to catch the flicker behind it. She knew. She just didn't know how deep it went. Charles cleared his throat and raised his glass. "To family," he announced, like a man desperately clinging to the illusion of unity. "To family," Genevieve echoed, though her knuckles were wide around the stem of her wineglass. "To family," I repeated, and clinked. Dinner continued. Filet mignon. Asparagus. Potatoes whipped to the consistency of a lie. I chewed slowly, sipped my water, engaged where appropriate. But I never stopped watching. Leona's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the butter knife. Avery noticed. "You okay, Mom?" "Fine, sweetheart," she replied, voice tight. Genevieve picked up the slack. "We're all just a little tired, that's all. Busy week." I leaned back and nodded. "Understandable. It's been quite the week already." Leona shot me a look, half warning, half desperation. She was waiting for me to crack, for me to bring it up. The envelope, the truth buried inside it. She wanted me to say it aloud so she could twist the narrative, make it about retaliation, make me the aggressor. But I wouldn't give her that, because by the time the steak was finished, the envelope had already been in her hands for 2 hours. Hand-delivered. No signature needed. No explanation attached. Just her name. Just truth, folded neatly into layers of consequences she could no longer undo. She didn't mention it. Neither did I. That silence grew louder than anything we could have screamed across that table. And I knew, from the stiffness in her posture, from the absence of appetite, that she had opened it. She had read it. And she knew the game was over. When dessert came, something citrusy and overly sweet, Jonas leaned toward me and asked, "Can I come by this weekend, Dad? I want you to try my game." I smiled. "Absolutely. Can't wait." Leona stiffened again. Genevieve pressed her lips together. Charles took a long drink of wine. Leona reached over once more, this time not to whisper, but to lean in, low and firm. "It's already done, Miles. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I turned to her, keeping my face pleasant. "Of course. Wouldn't dream of it." And I meant it. The harder part was already over. The moment she thought she could destroy me without consequence. That was the real fracture. Everything after was just math. Consequences. Cause. Effect. We finished dinner in a hollow peace. The kids chatted about school. Genevieve tried to compliment a charity I supposedly supported. Charles asked about a stock he was thinking of shorting. And me? I let it all wash over me like background static. None of it mattered now. When I stood to leave, I kissed Avery's forehead, ruffled Jonas's hair, nodded at the others. I paused just long enough behind Leona's chair to speak clearly enough for only her. "Sleep well tonight," I said. I didn't wait for a response. I walked out into the cool evening air, let the quiet settle into my bones, and smiled for the first time in weeks. Not because the war was over, because it had only just begun. It started with a vibration, subtle, persistent. My phone lit up just after 7 p.m. as I stepped out of the shower, the steam still clinging to the mirror, the scent of cedar soap thick in the air. I wrapped a towel around my waist, reached for the screen, and saw the first name flash. Leona. Then again, and again. 11 missed calls within 3 minutes. The woman who'd once gone days giving me one-word answers now suddenly needed to hear my voice that badly. I didn't answer. I let the panic throb on her end of the line. Let her sit in it. Let her pace, or cry, or rage into a cold glass of Chardonnay while the world around her cracked open. She had read the envelope. She knew what was coming. She just didn't know how far I was willing to take it. The next message came in, sharp and frantic. "What did you do?" All caps. No punctuation. That wasn't the voice of someone in control. That was someone who'd realized too late that they had lost it. I stared at it, then tossed the phone face down on the bed and dressed slowly, gray slacks, white shirt, no tie. Calm armor. My reflection stared back from the bathroom mirror, jaw tight, eyes focused. I had been preparing for this night for months, but I didn't expect to feel so still. The next ping wasn't from her. It was Genevieve. "Miles, please, call me, please. How did you find out? How did I find out?" That was the part that got me. Not, "This isn't true." Not, "You're mistaken." But how? Because guilt always knows what it's being accused of. I didn't reply. The silence between us had value now. It was currency. Proof that for once in their curated, privileged lives, they weren't controlling the flow of the narrative. They were reacting to it. Then came the email from Mara Ellison. Subject: urgent, immediate legal discussion requested. The body was brief. "Mr. Carver, recent developments have raised significant concern. I believe it is in everyone's best interest to schedule a meeting at your earliest availability. Please confirm a time. No bluff. No legalese. Just panic disguised as formality." I smiled. The night air was cool as I stepped out onto the back deck. The world outside didn't know what was happening inside theirs. It was peaceful, crickets in the distance, the soft hush of trees swaying in the breeze. Meanwhile, in living rooms across town, the Aldens were scrambling. Their fortress was crumbling, and no one had fired a shot. I didn't need to lift a weapon. I had delivered something heavier than bullets, truth. The kind that didn't go away when the news cycle ended. The kind that metastasizes, spreads, infects every deal, every handshake, every carefully built image they'd clung to for decades. Because what was in that envelope wasn't just leverage. It was evidence. A full copy had gone to a local investigative reporter I trusted, someone who didn't just chase gossip. She'd covered systemic abuse cases before, exposed corruption at the state level, and knew how to protect her sources. We had met once at a private conference on digital security. She had a quiet mind and a loud pen. I knew she'd handle it right. Another copy had gone to the ethics committee. I made sure it was flagged and marked as time-sensitive. The language inside was sharp, precise, undeniable. It wasn't emotional. It was factual. And that's what made it dangerous. It couldn't be spun into a smear campaign. It wasn't hearsay or angry speculation. It was names, dates, testimonies, signatures, scanned pages of sealed court records, real signatures from real victims who'd been silenced with checks and threats. And the final copy? That one mattered most. It went to Vanessa Cole. She hadn't responded yet. I didn't expect her to. People carry wounds in different ways, and some take time to open their hands to the past again. But she had the truth now. She could decide what to do with it. What I had done wasn't just for revenge. It was for restoration. There's a difference. Revenge is about power. Restoration is about balance. They had stolen stories, lives, reputations. I wasn't trying to destroy them. I was making sure they couldn't pretend it never happened. Inside, I poured myself a drink. Neat bourbon, the same bottle I'd received as a gift years ago from Charles Alden. Back when I still thought we were on the same team. Before I realized I was just a convenient addition to their family portfolio. The respectable, manageable black son-in-law. The one who built without noise and never asked too many questions. They had mistaken grace for weakness. They always had. I lifted the glass to my lips, letting the warmth settle in, when the landline rang. No one used it anymore, which meant someone had gone digging for it. I let it ring. On the fourth try, the answering machine kicked in. Leona's voice, still pre-recorded from happier years, filtered into the room. "You've reached the Carvers. Leave a message." Then the beep. Then silence. Then Genevieve's voice. "Miles, you win, all right? You've made your point. We can talk. Please. Don't do this to Leona. Don't do this to the children. We can make this right. We can fix it. I picked up the remote, deleted the message before it finished. Because that's what they always do when the mask slips, they beg. Not for forgiveness. For containment. They don't regret what they did. Only that it got out. By the time the sun went down, news outlets had already started calling my office for comment. My assistant forwarded 2 voicemails from anonymous sources asking if I had any involvement in the Alden leaks. I gave her a stock answer to repeat. No comment at this time. Let them speculate. The more questions they asked, the more interest the public would take. And this wasn't a story that would disappear by morning. Too many loose ends. Too many people who remembered whispers from years ago and would now feel safe enough to say something. I sipped my bourbon and opened my laptop. There it was, the first headline. Sealed court files expose abuse cover-up linked to Alden family. Subheadline. New evidence may reopen case dismissed in 2007. My phone buzzed again. I didn't check it. The panic had begun. And this time, I wasn't the one holding my breath. By Wednesday morning, the Alden name no longer stood on a polished marble pedestal. It lay shattered in headlines, bleeding out across news tickers and digital feeds, exposed for what it had always been. A curated myth wrapped around a rotten core. I didn't even have to turn on the television to see it unfold. It was in my inbox. In texts from people I hadn't heard from in years. In whispered conversations outside the coffee shop I passed on my way to work. People were buzzing, pretending to be shocked, but some of them knew. The Aldens had just been too powerful to touch. Until now. My phone lit up with alerts all morning. I ignored most of them. One came from a former colleague at the city council. You finally pulled the thread. Damn. Another was from a local nonprofit director. Genevieve just resigned. Board's collapsing. Half our sponsors already dropped. Then another, a simple forward from an anonymous number, a photo of Grant Mercer walking out of his firm's office with a cardboard box in hand. Head bowed. No Leona in sight. I stood in the window of my office and watched the clouds roll past the ridge, calm and gray. On the desk behind me sat the official countermotion I'd filed just hours earlier. Full custody. Citing parental misconduct. Citing character risk. Citing public scandal. Attached to the motion were certified copies of the once sealed court files. The ones detailing the 2007 cover-up, the misappropriation of funds, and the hush money paid to silence a grieving family. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a wrecking ball, dressed in legal ink. My lawyer, Monique, had sent me a one-line email after the filing. They won't recover from this. Be ready. Be ready. It echoed in my head as I sat down and read through the rest of the headlines. Genevieve had stepped down from every board she chaired, 5 in total. Her Empowerment for Girls initiative had pulled its website overnight. An anonymous whistleblower had already come forward, citing internal pressure to bury anything that could damage the Alden's brand. One news anchor called it a legacy implosion. Another labeled it a reckoning 15 years overdue. And yet, Leona hadn't said a word. No calls. No emails. Not even a cryptic text. I knew why. Because silence was the only thing she had left. Anything she said now could and would be used against her, by the media, by the court, and most importantly, by our children. She knew Avery and Jonas would see the articles. That their classmates would talk. That the name they once wore like a badge of privilege now carried weight that crushed, not lifted. And Grant? He vanished. I checked one of the secure trackers I'd set up weeks ago, one tied to his firm's digital footprint. His personal website had gone dark. No activity. No new projects. The man who'd once smirked across dinner tables and called me partner-in-law hadn't even had the courage to stand by her when the fire reached their door. He left her holding the match and the blame. Cowardice always looks like silence when the pressure's high enough. At noon, I met with Monique at her firm's private conference suite. She wore her usual no-nonsense navy blazer, glasses perched low, and a stack of papers ready to review. She had been skeptical at first, when I told her I planned to expose a decades-old sealed case in the middle of a divorce. But now, she was all business. They won't contest custody anymore, she said, flipping through the newest court filings. Their strategy now is damage control. And the kids? I asked. Avery's old enough to have a say. Jonas is young, but given the public nature of the scandal and the risk exposure from being associated with Leona's family, we have a strong case for primary custody. Full, if we want it. I nodded. I didn't smile. It wasn't a victory. It was necessary. There's a difference. Grant's team sent a request to separate their firm's financials from Leona's, she added. He's claiming ignorance. Says he was unaware of any illegal activity and is distancing himself from both the business and the relationship. So, he's abandoning ship. He was never built to survive the storm, Monique replied, almost sympathetically. People like him fold when the shine wears off. I signed the document she handed me. Motions. Agreements. Notices. With each stroke of the pen, I wasn't just securing custody or dissolving marital ties. I was building something. A line between the man they thought they could ruin and the man who was still standing. After the meeting, I didn't go back to the office. I went home. Real home. The one I'd worked for. Paid for. The one she tried to claim without earning. And I found Jonas sitting in the living room, building a Lego tower, his brow furrowed in concentration. Avery was upstairs on a video call with her therapist. I didn't interrupt either of them. I just stood there, watching my son hum to himself, completely unaware that the world around him had shifted overnight. This was what mattered. This was what I'd protected. And I knew the hardest part was still ahead. Because children don't understand public scandal the way adults do. They feel it. They hear it in the way people hesitate when they say their names. They see it in their mother's eyes when she can't explain why her face is on the news. They carry it silently, and sometimes unfairly. But I would walk them through it, one truth at a time, without poison, without lies, just clarity. By late afternoon, I received an alert. Leona's firm had filed for bankruptcy protection. A cascade effect. Sponsors gone. Clients canceling. Employees quitting. Her once buzzed-about design label, featured in glossy magazines and influencer campaigns, had become a pariah brand. She had tied herself too tightly to the Alden legacy. And when it fell, she had no ground to stand on. And all I had done was expose the truth. Not shout. Not smear. Not sabotage. Just reveal. Let it speak for itself. So I sat on the porch with Jonas that evening, watching the sky shift into burnt orange and lavender streaks. He handed me a blue Lego brick and said, "You do the roof, Dad." I took it, pressed it into place. The house we were building didn't need marble floors or curated dinner parties. It just needed honesty. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of lies lift from the air around me. Not because the fire was out, but because I'd stopped pretending it wasn't burning. The conference room was cold, not from temperature, but from intention. The AC hummed too loud. The blinds were drawn tight, like someone was afraid of being watched, and the overhead lights cast a pale glare across the lacquered table that stretched between us. I arrived 10 minutes early. Not because I was eager, but because presence is a kind of power. Let them walk into a room I already owned. Let them sit in silence and feel it before a single word passed. Mara Ellison entered first, her lips pressed into a line, so thin it could have sliced granite. She looked diminished. Her posture still held authority, but the edges were frayed. The woman who had barged into my office weeks ago with smug confidence now moved like she was walking through a minefield. Carefully, deliberately, like the next step might end her career. She offered no greeting, just a clipped nod and a glance toward the chair opposite me. She didn't sit yet. She was waiting for the real collapse to enter the room. Leona walked in a moment later, alone. No Grant. No Charles. No Genevieve. Just her. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, then darted away almost instantly, as if she couldn't hold the gaze of the man she once tried to destroy. Her foundation couldn't hide the paleness in her cheeks. Her once proud posture had shrunk, shoulders tight, hands clasped in front of her like a child caught in a lie. She wore navy slacks and a beige blouse that still screamed wealth but no longer held the weight of dominance. She looked like someone who'd been up all night scrubbing headlines off her skin. She sat across from me. Mara took her seat beside her, opened her folder, and folded her hands with a careful breath. "We'd like to settle," she said. I didn't reply. I let the silence answer for me. Leona cleared her throat. "You get what you want," she said quietly. "You always do." I didn't correct her. I didn't remind her that what I wanted, once, was her. That I built my life around our family, not this war. That I gave her every chance to turn back before I ever moved a single piece on the board. No, I let the moment stretch. Because silence has weight. And in that room, with their illusions turned to ash, I let them feel every ounce of it. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the folder. No theatrics. No smirk. I laid it flat on the table and slid it forward. Inside was the final agreement. Clean. Surgical. Ironclad. I retained the house, my house, the one I paid for before her name was ever on the deed. I retained all investment accounts and financial holdings tied to the trust I'd built over 15 years. Custody was mine full. She would get visitation after undergoing a court-approved psychological evaluation and completing a 6-month parenting program. Not because I was cruel, but because you don't get to fight for full custody one week and cry for shared holidays the next. Actions have weight, and consequences aren't cruel. They're earned. The agreement offered her a monthly allowance. Not alimony. This wasn't charity. Just enough to cover her basic needs while she figured out who she was without the Alden legacy propping her up. No brand endorsements. No client referrals. No return to business as usual. That door was gone. She would have to learn how to knock again. Mara's hands trembled slightly as she reviewed it. Her eyes moved too fast across the lines. She was looking for holes, soft spots to pry open and salvage something. But there weren't any. She began, then faltered. This is final, I said, cutting through her hesitation. Leona didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just stared at the folder like it was a gravestone. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was small. What about the press? I tilted my head. What about them? You could make this go away, she said. You could tell them you had nothing to do with the leaks. You could end it. I met her eyes, steady and calm. Did I lie? She looked down. No, then why would I silence truth? Mara interjected. For the children's sake, Mr. Carver, I am thinking about the children. I snapped, not loud, but firm enough to stop her breath. That's why I won't lie for you. Genevieve had trained her daughter well, taught her that reputation is more important than accountability. That perception is power. But that day, in that room, Leona sat like a student who realized the syllabus had changed and the exam was already over. She reached for the pen, hand shaking slightly. Do I have to sign now? She asked. No, I replied. You get to. She signed. Mara watched. Deflated. There was no performance to give now. No judge to charm. No smear campaign left to run. Just signatures on a document they never thought they'd be handed by the man they believed would go quietly. I stood, collected my copy, and nodded once to the room. No theatrics. No final words. But just as I reached the door, I heard Leona's voice, small, cracked. Why, Miles? I turned back slowly. She looked up at me, eyes red but dry. Why go this far? I stepped closer, just enough to speak without the air conditioning swallowing my voice. Because you chose war over conversation, I said. You didn't just betray me, Leona. You tried to erase me. As a husband, as a father, you made me invisible on purpose. You made our children question my place. And when I didn't react the way you expected, you assumed I was weak. But I wasn't silent because I didn't know. I was silent because I was building. Her face fell, but I wasn't done. This isn't revenge. This is repair. Of everything you tried to tear apart. She didn't speak again. She just nodded faintly, as if the weight of the truth had finally settled where it belonged. I left the conference room without looking back. And I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. The conference room door clicked shut behind me, and the air outside felt thinner, cleaner. I walked down the hallway without urgency, without needing to perform for anyone. I'd said what needed to be said. I had left nothing unsaid. At least, not aloud. The rest, what still pulsed beneath my skin, what still lingered between Leona and me, was a conversation neither of us had the language to hold. Not anymore. It's strange what the mind lingers on after war. You'd think it would be victory, relief, maybe even guilt. But mine kept looping back to a single moment. Her voice, soft, nearly inaudible behind me as I stood at the door. Why, Miles? Why? As if she hadn't been there for every turn of the blade she twisted. As if she'd suddenly woken up to the fallout and wanted a post-mortem before the dust settled. But there was something about her tone, not manipulative, not proud, just small. And maybe, buried beneath it, was the version of her I used to know. The one who fell asleep on my shoulder during road trips. The one who danced barefoot in our first apartment while pasta boiled over and jazz played from an old Bluetooth speaker. That Leona was gone. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't wonder, for just a moment, if a part of her had survived under the ruins. That's why I turned around. Not to reopen wounds. Just to see if she'd even try to speak truth for once. Tell me one thing, I had said. Was any of it ever real? I hadn't planned to ask that. It came from somewhere deeper than strategy, deeper than the lawyer-slick rhythm of the last few weeks. It came from the boy in me, the one who had believed in forever once. She hesitated. That alone was an answer. But then she said, it was. In the beginning. Then you changed. A part of me almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. The ancient deflection. The reframing. But I stayed calm. I stayed rooted. No, I said. I evolved. You just didn't think I would. She didn't respond. And I didn't need her to. Because that was the last piece. The final click of the puzzle. I saw her then. Not the woman who betrayed me. Not the Alden heir trying to salvage a name. But someone unmasked. Hollow, but not broken. Because she'd never let herself break. She had only ever allowed herself to shift, to calculate, to adapt. But when truth comes, it doesn't ask if you're ready. It doesn't care how pretty your face looks under courtroom lights. It just removes the costume and leaves the bones. I walked away knowing she would sit there long after I left, not because of guilt, but because she finally had no more audience. Later that evening, I drove out to the coast, where the wind didn't carry expectations and the horizon didn't ask questions. There's something about the ocean at dusk, it erases noise. The tide doesn't care who you were at breakfast. It doesn't carry headlines or court filings. Just rhythm. Constant, uncaring rhythm. I parked on a cliff overlook, rolled down the window, and just breathed. No music. No calls. No pressure. For the first time in months, maybe years, my chest didn't feel tight. My jaw didn't ache from clenching. I had spent so long holding the world together for a woman who was quietly dismantling it behind my back that I forgot what stillness felt like. And that's when it hit me. The things we don't say aren't always the things we're afraid of. Sometimes, they're the things we know won't matter to the person hearing them. That's why I never told Leona that I still remembered her perfume from our honeymoon, or that I'd kept every drawing Avery ever made, even the ones she balled up and threw away. That I still whispered, I got you, under my breath every time Jonas hit the field for a game, even if he didn't look back to see. I didn't say those things because Leona stopped seeing them a long time ago. They were invisible to her, the way comfort becomes background noise. The way love becomes a set piece instead of a force. She didn't destroy us with one decision. She eroded us slowly, silently, with forgetfulness. And eventually, she forgot who I was entirely. But I didn't forget. I remembered every detail. Because I needed to. Because someone had to carry the truth of what it once was before it became what it ended as. I sat there on that cliff, watching the last edge of sun disappear beneath the waves, and realized something important. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't come with parades or trophies. It comes in the quiet. It comes in the knowing. It comes when you can sit alone, without rage, without fear, and still feel whole. When I got home, the house was dark except for the kitchen light. Avery had left a note on the counter in her looping, slanted handwriting. Jonas and I made you dinner. It's in the fridge. Love you. I stood there for a long time just reading it, over and over, until the ink burned into my chest like a bomb. I opened the fridge. Pasta, garlic bread, sliced fruit in a plastic bowl. Nothing fancy. Everything real. I ate in silence. Not the silence of emptiness. The silence of truth. The silence of a man who had been through fire and came out not unburned, but alive. I washed the plate, put it away, looked around at a house that no longer felt like it was pretending to be happy. No more tension hiding in walls. No more waiting for footsteps I didn't trust. No more erasing myself to make space for someone who resented the sound of my name. That night, I wrote something down in my journal, a habit I picked up when the lies started feeling too loud. Just one sentence. Truth doesn't kill. It unmasks. That's all I needed to say. Because now she was unmasked, and I no longer had anything left to prove. 3 months. That's how long it took for the storm to pass. Or, more accurately, for the dust to settle just enough to see the damage clearly. You don't rebuild in the middle of fire. You wait until the embers cool and the smoke clears enough to breathe again. I didn't rush. I didn't announce anything. I just started moving, brick by brick, routine by routine, reclaiming the spaces that had once been shared with ghosts. Avery adjusted quicker than I expected. She was always the more adaptable one. Sharp, observant, quiet in a way that made you forget she was cataloging everything. She didn't ask too many questions about the news stories, or the change in living arrangements, or why Leona's calls came less frequently. She processed it all in layers. She'd come home from school, dump her backpack by the couch, and ask if I wanted to bake something. It wasn't about cookies. It was about control, stability, a familiar rhythm we didn't have to explain. Jonas took a little longer. He clung to structure, the Saturday bike rides, the nightly check-ins, the lunchbox notes. I'd started leaving again. You got this. Proud of you. Trust your feet. He didn't always respond, but he kept them. I'd find them folded in his jeans pockets or tucked into books. He was listening, even when he didn't say it out loud. I didn't speak badly about Leona. Not once. Not even when the temptation curled at the edges of my frustration. Because I knew the truth would unfold on its own. Children don't need to be told who someone is. They'll see it in the quiet, in who shows up, in who follows through, in who listens when it's inconvenient. Time reveals what anger never can. Leona moved 2 cities over, into a high-rise condo that cost half her reputation to maintain. She started pitching new design projects again, though most of them were declined before they reached a conference room. The Alden name was a liability now. Even the ones who used to parade behind it like royalty backed away, as if proximity might ruin them by association. Her brand became a symbol not of luxury, but of legacy collapse. Every design show she pitched Googled her name before they returned her call. Most didn't call back. Genevieve, to no one's surprise, resigned from every board and charity she once chaired. Her public statement blamed ongoing health concerns. But everyone knew what really plagued her was exposure. She moved to a private estate outside the city. Word was she barely left the house. Not because she was hiding, because there was no one left to perform for. And me? I didn't dance on their downfall. I didn't celebrate in the streets or post cryptic quotes on social media. I lived. Quietly. Intentionally. Precisely. I started going on long walks at sunrise, something I hadn't done in years. Just me, the sky, and the slow churn of breath in and out of lungs that no longer felt caged. I rejoined the community basketball league I used to play in before late meetings and broken dinners derailed that part of my life. Every Thursday night, I ran the court, not to win, but to feel the thud of sneakers against hardwood, the echo of a clean pass, the rhythm of a game that didn't ask questions. I started cooking more, real meals, not rushed reheats or takeout in styrofoam. I let Avery pick the recipes. I let Jonas set the table. They argued about music while we prepped, and I let them. Those small arguments were the kind of normal I'd forgotten to value. One night, I came into the kitchen to find Jonas teaching her a TikTok dance while pasta boiled over. I didn't stop them. I just turned off the burner and watched. That's the thing about rebuilding quietly, it's not dramatic. It doesn't need applause. You start to measure success in deeper breaths, in soft laughter, in the absence of dread when your phone rings. Work kept moving forward. Hollow Ridge absorbed a wave of new clients. Many of them companies that once partnered with Alden-backed ventures. They didn't say it out loud, but the shift was obvious. I became a symbol of what integrity could look like under pressure. The man who didn't blink when the storm hit. I didn't lean into it. I let the work speak. But I can't deny the respect hit differently when it came without asterisks. I also started seeing a therapist. Not because I was falling apart, but because I wasn't. And that in itself was unfamiliar. She asked me once, "Do you feel like you've forgiven her?" I sat with that question for a long time. "No," I said finally, "but I've stopped bleeding from it." She nodded. Sometimes, that's the real version of forgiveness. One afternoon, while organizing some boxes from the garage, I came across an old photo album. One of the few Leona hadn't taken when she moved out. I flipped through the pages, vacations, birthday parties, quiet mornings on the porch. The smiles in those pictures didn't feel like lies. They felt like echoes, like who we were before choices replaced commitment. I didn't rip them up. I didn't throw it away. I closed the album, put it back in the box, and wrote "Past" in thick black marker across the lid. That was enough. Every Sunday, we held what Avery called reset dinner. No phones, no TV, just food and conversation. She'd ask questions from a deck she found online. Icebreakers, hypotheticals, things like, if you could live in any time period, which would you choose? Or, what's one thing you want to learn before next year? Jonas would grumble at first, but he always ended up leaning in. So did I. Because there's something powerful about presence when it's chosen. Sometimes, Leona called. Not often. Usually to speak to the kids. I never denied her access. But I stopped filling in the silence. I no longer felt the need to explain who I was or what I was doing. She no longer had that privilege. She used to send follow-up texts after the calls, comments on how Avery sounded distant or Jonas seemed tired. I stopped responding. If she wanted to reconnect with her children, she'd have to build the bridge herself. I wouldn't hold the planks for her anymore. People asked me, on occasion, if I ever considered getting back out there, dating, rebuilding that part of life. I'd smile politely and say, eventually. But in truth, I wasn't rushing. Because peace had taken so long to arrive. And I needed to know what it felt like to live inside it fully before inviting anyone else into it. One morning, Jonas came downstairs in his pajamas, hair messy, rubbing his eyes. "Dad," he mumbled. "I think I get it now." "Get what?" I asked, pouring his cereal. "Why you don't yell? Why you just do stuff?" I looked at him. "What stuff?" "Like, protect people without making a mess." I didn't say anything right away. I just handed him the bowl. "That's how I know you're the strongest," he said, before shoveling a spoonful into his mouth. I turned away, blinking against the sudden sting in my eyes. Not because I needed to hide, but because sometimes the quietest moments hit the loudest. Rebuilding quietly doesn't mean erasing the past. It means choosing what parts you want to carry forward. And for me, I chose peace. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that hums with normalcy. The lawn had just been mowed. Jonas, earbuds in, proudly navigating the clunky push mower like it was a war machine. Avery danced across the back patio, lost in whatever pop anthem ruled her playlist that week. I was sitting in my home office with the windows cracked, the faint scent of freshly cut grass folding into the room when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. "Mr. Carver?" The voice was tight, hesitant, practiced. "Yes. My name is Juliet Monroe. I got your number from someone at Hollow Ridge." She paused. "I think my husband is planning to make me disappear." I leaned back, eyes narrowing on the ceiling like the paint might offer some clarity. I knew that voice. Not her name. Her tone. The edge of fear laced with embarrassment. The kind of fear you only hear when someone's been told they're crazy too many times to believe their own instincts. I glanced outside again. Jonas had stopped mowing, now tugging the mower back toward the shed. Avery twirled once before collapsing into a chair, grinning at her own dramatics. "All right, Juliet," I said, pulling a pin from the drawer. "Start from the beginning." She did. And as she spoke, as she laid out the holes in her husband's timeline, the strange deposits, the cameras suddenly installed in the guest room for safety, I didn't just listen. I recognized it. The pattern. The silence. The arrogance of someone who believed he was smarter than a woman slowly learning to trust her intuition again. I'd seen that movie. I'd been in the cast. Juliet didn't know it yet, but she wasn't just asking for help. She was offering something too, reminding me why I started this work in the first place. Why I hadn't walked away completely after my case ended. Because there would always be another door. Another husband who thought charm could mask cruelty. Another family too polished to admit its fractures. When she finished, I promised to help. I gave her a contact list, told her what to document, what to copy, what to secure. She exhaled slowly. One of those long, tired exhales you can only manage when you've been holding your breath for years. After we hung up, I sat in that stillness, the kind that settles in just before your mind starts asking the heavier questions. People think the hardest part of betrayal is the moment it breaks. It's not. It's what comes after. The quiet rebuild. The rooms that echo differently. The questions your children don't ask but feel anyway. But I'd made peace with that. Because some men don't fight back out of rage. They fight out of clarity. Because once you've had your name erased from a courtroom petition, once you've watched the woman you loved weaponize the silence between you, you stop seeing conflict as chaos. You see it as calculation, strategy, architecture. I had rebuilt from nothing. Not with noise, but with precision. Not with vengeance, but with truth. And I had learned something through it all. Mercy is for those who don't know the truth. But I know the truth, and I never forget it.